Manny Montanez.
So much. What a beautiful morning to celebrate Mass with so many of you and so many familiar faces. We are all so blessed considering tragedies happening around the world, and it should be a daily reminder of how truly blessed we are to live in our great country. As I stand here before you, I'm reminded of the men and women around the world, some cold, some wet, some under fire from those who would hate us for who we are in our country and the many freedoms that we enjoy. So again, thank you for this opportunity. I could talk forever about my experiences, but if I don't, it's like my wife said, if I don't have something to keep me, we'll be here most of the morning. There's so many times of crisis, and perhaps most importantly, the times that I've turned to God. Sometimes we cry, help me, or please, or save me. God wants to be there for us. God wants us to turn and ask for intimacy, comfort, and help, if we only take a minute to do so. For many of us, this is very difficult, a very, very difficult time. It was for me, and it is to pray. We don't exactly know what to ask for. We feel like asking for a miracle, but experience might have shown us that asking for miracles in the past has left us disappointed. They say confession is good for the soul, and I will confess that at times I may even have become cynical about God. Cynical about having asked for help when I really needed it, and getting what I asked for, and not getting what I asked for. Perhaps I prayed that my grandmother would recover from her illness, and she didn't. Maybe I prayed that my biopsy would come back negative, but it didn't. I might have asked for a raise I desperately needed, and didn't get it. I will share how I fervently prayed to rescue a deteriorating relationship in the 70s when my first wife filed for divorce, and how at the time my prayers were not answered. Careful, Lynn. Confession, good for the soul. At times, and sometimes in our lives, we probably have confronted an image of God as a magician, an all-powerful Superman who can fix anything if he only chose to. Part of the reason why this image is so difficult to give up is that we may not know what to replace it with. A path to prayer opens when we let God be the tender, compassionate God of the Scriptures, and when we let Jesus reveal God's good news to us. In this faith, God does not manage the world like a puppeteer, pulling strings to suspend natural laws in a capricious response to an individual's prayers. In faith, God is revealed as a God of power during those places where God is most powerless. In faith, God grieves with us at the tragedies of life. In faith, we are freed by the good news that God has overcome the ultimate power of sin and death. God has not prevented sin and death from happening. When we believe in God's mercy and trust that our lives were created for eternal life in God, we are liberated from a fear of sin and death, which can paralyze us. I believe it is critical to pray and ask for the spiritual strength to empower our resilience to better deal with adversity, increase our health, happiness, and life satisfaction through true faith. Thus, live a life of and create and live daily an attitude of gratitude. As someone who has faced head-on and experienced near-death tragedies, one of my biggest fears is looking like a hypocrite. In no way do I consider myself more grateful, optimistic, or kinder than anyone else, especially here in this room. Gratitude is something that we all read about, we study, and try to practice in our daily life because we need and believe in gratitude and the power of fruitfulness. Nonetheless, and believe it or not, I also spend time being irritable and indulging in self-pity. When this happens, I try to catch myself, step away to regroup by pausing and praying, walking and praying, which is a big part of my daily life, in my everyday life, praying multiple rosaries throughout the day. As a youngster, especially in the early years of my life, it was gratitude that made me acknowledge the good in our lives. I came to believe that we also usually see that the source of that goodness lies at least partially outside of us and causes us to connect to something larger than ourselves. As I grew in age and knowledge, I was able to separate gratitude in connection to other people, nature, and more importantly, my faith and belief in God, and that we are not alone. Why do I share gratitude with you this morning? It's because every day since 8 January 1969, I start each day saying, "Thank you, Jesus," when I wake up and when my feet hit the ground, the floor. Gratitude has been and remains a critical part and awareness of my everyday life, as I believe it has inspired me from an early age. I'll just give you a little bit of glimpse. To show you the rest of my legs, I would have to drop my pants, and I'm not going to do that.
Manny, that's your wife.
I have one mulligan. Don't make me get that second mulligan. But as I share how important my Catholic faith has been in my life to date, I believe it is important to give you but a glimpse of my humble beginnings and how faith in times of crisis was evident to me. My journey to being born in Billings, Montana started as the result of my grandfather and his oldest son, Santos, Saints, I called them Uncle Saints, being part of a program called the Bracero Program, a program of imported cheap Mexican laborers used to build and finish the railroads because most American males were all fighting wars in Europe and the Pacific. My grandfather received a promotion to the Great Northern Pacific Railroad, which required a move from California to Billings, Montana. He shared with the UP, the Union Pacific, that he could not accept this promotion as his citizenship papers and process was not complete, which prompted the UP to help fast-track his paperwork and citizenship, thus earning his always prayer, blessing, and thankfulness of being a U.S. citizen, and thus allowed the move to Billings, Montana, where I was born. Interesting to note that I was born at the same hospital as my dear friend and friend of many in this room, Ken Tate, St. Vincent's Hospital, Billings, Montana. My mother and father, both born in the USA, would meet through the communal get-togethers with other railroad families and eventually get married. My mom shared with me that these get-togethers would also include prayer times, which further inspired me and my Catholic faith, as praying the rosary of a family became a daily occurrence in our life. My mother and father believed strongly in a Catholic education, and I would attend St. Teresa of the Little Flower Catholic School in Billings, Montana, through the second grade. I recall as a second grader sharing with the others how important the rosary was in my family, and I believe it generated some brownie points with Sister Louise. My prayer life and my awareness of praying to God took on significant new meaning as I would experience my father highly intoxicated and verbally and physically abusive when he got home late on Friday nights after getting paid and drinking with other railroad co-workers. As I was the first of 7 born in my family, I would help my little sister and my little brother in praying, pulling the sheets over their heads, as we saw our intoxicated father being mean to our mom. As I got older, I even recall praying to God, asking that my father not be a mean father. I even prayed that my mom would divorce my father, but she never did. This is important to note, as this was when my mother would open the Bible with us kids and share important readings, of which the reading I clearly recall her sharing, and I share it almost weekly. Jeremiah 1:5, that before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Powerful, powerful words. I would question why God would allow my father to be mean, especially when he was intoxicated, which made him a meaner Mexican. Not a pretty sight. My father would leave the railroad and shared how he was introduced to someone with a company called Peter Kiewit, a large contractor, and shared how he was excited to share accepting a new job opportunity with Peter Kiewit building Interstate 80, a job that required a move from Montana to Scottsbluff in western Nebraska. We would move, and suddenly I would be without grandparents, uncles, aunts, and those most important to me in my life, like Sister Louise. All those who helped shape and inspire my Catholic faith. My daily prayer life would become more important to me as I faced new challenges, and again, wondering if God heard my prayers. I recall a saying by Mahatma Gandhi when he said, and I quote, "Prayer is not asking, it is a longing of the soul. It is daily admission of one's weaknesses. It is better in prayer to have a heart without words than words without a heart." My parents would enroll me and my sister and brother in St. Agnes in Scottsbluff, and it seems like my troubles just got bigger. I would ask my mom and dad why we couldn't just go to Roosevelt, the public school just 4 blocks away, instead of a Catholic school over a mile away. My mom said that a Catholic education was essential, and to them as parents, they would do everything they could to see that we received a Catholic education. I was confused as a youngster, as I thought the Catholics were slightly saintlier because of our prayer life, and that thus my dad should not be the mean father that he was. I learned later how my father had to deal with less than pleasant personal and work experiences being a Mexican and being discriminated against. This became clear to me when I would get in fights with my neighborhood buddies who would tease me about my uniforms, and then being called a dirty Mexican at St. Agnes. Burritos for lunch versus bologna and P&J sandwiches seemed to be what helped bring down the barriers, as trading lunches led to warmer relationships and friendships. Be encouraged, hold your head high, and know God is in control and has a plan for you. Instead of focusing on all the bad, be thankful for all the good. Times would improve over the next few years as the neighborhood buddies and my St. Agnes friends on the other side of the tracks would no longer be critical life issues, as we all seemed to grow out of our childish behaviors, and we all became friends to this day. My mom would become a nurse working at St. Mary's Hospital at Scottsbluff. And it seemed like my father became friendlier, even when he came home intoxicated. He had episodes where his drinking caused chaos when he got home asking for this and that and being mean. My faith seemed to really be a key factor in my life when in the 7th grade, my mom said at dinner that they had a shortage of help at the hospice unit across the street from St. Mary's Hospital. She asked me if I would like to help out by spending the night in a room with a male patient who was bedridden, by handing them his bedpan at night after the nurses left, giving them their nighttime meds. My mom said I would earn $50 an evening, and by doing so, it would help defray tuition expenses. I did it reluctantly and quickly realized how impactful this experience was on my prayer life. As it seemed like my father was always working, my mom would sit us down and we would read the Bible. My mom was not only a nurse, but she was a living saint, as are, I believe, all nurses are. I recall her sharing and reading Hebrews 6:10. God is not unjust, and he will never overlook your work helping others. In addition to getting my homework done, I would assist the terminally ill patients, the bedridden patients, with their bedpans. I became good friends with Mr. Thompson before he passed away, and then Mr. Wybera. Both were World War II veterans, with Mr. Wybera a Catholic and Mr. Thompson a Lutheran. After giving them their bedpans for some unfinished business, I would wash my hands and finish my homework and then pray the rosary quietly to myself. Mr. Thompson was a non-practicing Lutheran, and I recall him asking me what praying the rosary and praying to the saints was all about. I would do the best I could in describing what the rosary meant to me and how we only pray to God and through those who have gone before us and intercede for us and our intentions. Thus, Mr. Thompson would pray with me until he was sound asleep. I would then brush my teeth, fix my bed on the couch in their room. I rarely got a good night's sleep, as it seemed he had to go potty every hour on the hour. They say that spreading love is essential. Always hug the people you care about, make sure they know that you care and appreciate them. And always make it known to your friends and family that you love them. My mom would work the night shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. and pick me up and take me home for breakfast, a clean uniform, and then I was off to St. Agnes. I so missed Sister Rose, as she knew how I was helping out at the hospice center. And I remember how one day in a silent reading period, I fell asleep with my hands over my forehead like this. Sleeping soundly and slobbering all over my book, Sister called my name, Mr. Montanez. Mr. Montanez. I was asleep, and my friend Jim Pierce said, Manuel. Yes, I was a Manuel before I was a Manny. Sister Rose is calling on you. I woke up startled, and wiping the slobber off of my mouth, said, yes, sister, to which she said, do you feel ill? I said, yes, sister. She said, go to the nurse's office, which I did, and I took a nice nap. Thank you, Sister Rose. I remember one day in the 8th grade asking Sister Rose why we went to Mass so often, and especially every first Friday of the month, and prayed the rosary. I will never forget the very stern look on her face when I asked her that question. She said as only a stern Dominican nun could. I think she wanted to grab my ear. Mr. Montanez, and she pondered like that. You will never die without a priest around to administer your last rites. This, mind you, was when I was 14 years old. Little did I realize at the time the profound impact those words from Sister Rose would have on me in the not too distant future. With the Cuban Missile Crisis in the news, it seemed like everyone was building fallout shelters. It seemed like Minutemen's missile silos were being built all over Scottsbluff County. I would graduate from high school, and after a year of college with the Cuban Missile Crisis and Russian war rhetoric, and this little-known country in Southeast Asia called Vietnam being constantly in the news, I would join the Army. In basic training and spending lonely nights long before cell phones, I would find myself praying, yes, the rosary, and recall my Uncle Santos, my Uncle Saints, being a bracero with his father and joining the Army, the U.S. Army, as soon as he received his citizenship. He would get his citizenship and he joined the Army and wanted to be with the 101st Airborne. He shared his experience in being wounded at the Battle of the Bulge by a German bazooka shell. The Germans used to fill their bazookas and mortars with wood splinters because if the blast did not kill you, the wood splinters would wound you, cause infections, and thus slow the advance of the U.S. Forces. Germans were very smart. How he was wounded by the German bazooka that was filled with wood splinters, and how he and others in his units so admired General Patton and his Third Army for coming to his unit's rescue at Bastogne. In reality, it was my Uncle Santos' experience and story that made me want to be a tank commander, like General Patton. Be careful what you wish for. After basic training, leadership prep, thanks to my Boy Scout experience, I would be given orders for Armor Advanced Individual Training, followed by the NCOC, Non-Commissioned Officers Academy, all at Fort Knox, Kentucky. I would graduate the NCOC as a Staff Sergeant E6, one of two, followed by 3 months at an Armor Training Brigade before getting my set of orders. Thinking about the missile crisis, I always figured on being sent to Europe, where I would get my wish in fighting the Russians in tank-to-tank warfare, if war ever did break out. I would instead get orders for Vietnam and arrive in Vietnam on August 13th, 1968, assigned to the 3rd Squadron, 4th Armored Cav Regiment, 25th Infantry Division. I would be assigned to Alpha Troop, 1st Platoon, and handed the keys to Alpha 16, a 50-ton main battle tank, as tank commander. Again, be careful what you wish for. I even recall bloodstains from the previous tank commander who was wounded, and thus making me his replacement. Arriving in August of '68, there were continuing firefights following the start of the Tet Offensive, the Chinese Lunar New Year. I would soon survive my initial firefight and again recall having my scapular on and praying the rosary. I believe that helped me endure long days and sleepless nights. We okay on time? In a combat unit, there was always the worry of not getting too close to others, as losing a platoon member was devastating, as there are no Mexicans, Polacks, Negroes, or whites. We were all brothers. I remember, and I wish we could, we don't have the projector up, but I had some photos of kids in Vietnam where we'd go through the villages. And a minute ago I shared that one reading about helping others. And a platoon of Armored Cavalry Regiment consists of 3 tanks, 5 armored personnel carriers, and the command track. That's a platoon. We were going through a village, and tank always led the column, followed by APCs dispersed or guns opposite in case of an ambush. And I happened that day to be bringing up the rear. We were going through this little village, and I remember these little kids standing there, one kid doing this, rubbing his tummy, pointing at his mouth, just frail, thin. And the track in front of us had some infantry guys, and we were rolling kind of slow. And I see this one soldier grab a can of sea rations, and he threw it so hard at this little kid, hit him in the chest, knocked him out. And they were laughing. And I got on the radio. I said, all 160 elements, 10 elements, stop. And they stopped. The platoon leader said, Sarge, what's up? And I said, you better get back here before I do something drastic. I jumped off my tank, and I grabbed that soldier, and I pulled him to the ground, and I took my .45 out, and I put it in his mouth. I almost shot him. And my guys were saying, Sarge, don't do it. It ain't worth it. And I said to that soldier with that 45 in his mouth, all those kids were asking for was food. And by that time, I caught hold of myself. I pulled the pistol out, hammered down, and got him up. And when we left, those kids had more C rations. They had boxes of food. I'll tell you, I think they had a fiesta that day. Well, on 8 January 1969, while on a search and destroy mission close to the Cambodian border, our first platoon made contact at about 0800 hours. We would approach a wood line and the hedgerow and started receiving heavy machine gun and RPG fire. We would return fire, and then our platoon leader had us pull back until we could assess the size and strength of the enemy from the initial burst of fire. We would then call in artillery from a fire support base close by and prep the area. And we had gunships on stations, so they fired rockets. Anyway, after the dust cleared, we began to move back in the line formation, again, interdispersed with infantry on the ground, moving, all the time being careful for craters that were caused by the artillery. As we began to advance, thinking the artillery and gunships would scare off a smaller unit, it was determined, we learned later, that it was a larger battalion-sized unit, and they were dug in with steel-reinforced bunkers. This unit was protecting a large underground hospital complex with a stockpile of weapons and rice. These underground complexes were so conveniently located close to the Ho Chi Minh Trail, kind of like we're seeing in the Middle East right now, in Gaza. Our platoon leader made the decision again to pull back and utilize our air power, and thus we brought in, again, Cobra gunships and F-4 Phantoms to drop napalm. Again, I have photos of all that, but not able to pull it up. Following the airstrikes, they dropped napalm so close to us, it draws all the oxygen. You could feel the burning in your lungs trying to breathe, because that napalm would just suck that air from around you. We started our advance again, careful not to fall in one of the bomb craters. As we advanced in line as a platoon, I was the farthest right element. The fire became intense one more, and we were slowly advancing, firing our weapons. I felt the tank lunge, bless you. I felt the tank lunge like we were about to go into a crater, kind of that feeling, back and forth. Yelling, I told the driver to stop and back up when I heard click, click. The distinct sound of like we almost threw a track off of the main sprocket. Well, not knowing which track, I hurriedly dismounted and low-crawled under immense machine gun and sniper fire and realized we had not completely thrown off the right track, but close to it. I low-crawled to the back to see which side it was, and then I low-crawled to the front. And the driver of a tank is in the front, and he looks through portholes, so his depth perception is not the best. He can't see down. So I was doing this, meaning lock the left, and a tank is steered by, it's like a half a wheel, but basically it's not, you don't turn all the way, it's just slight movements. And you turn a little and it locks to the side and the other track pulls you around. Well, I was able to do this to the driver, and he did this to the tank, and we snapped the track back on the sprocket, if that makes any sense. I hope it does. And we were back in action again. With the fire raging around me, I thought, I got to really be quick, because to crawl up on top of a tank, it's like 12 feet from the ground up. Realizing that we had not thrown the track completely off the sprocket, I low-crawled to the front, and we were able to successfully be back in action. I scampered back up in the TC cupola and again gave command to move forward. Having penetrated the enemy's front line and moving forward, I see a couple RPGs coming my way. And one hit perfectly right below the tank commander's cupola. Anyway, the tank commander sits in an area above and he's exposed this part of his body and can't see this part below, but one of those RPGs came in so perfect and burnt through 10 inches of steel. I mean, the head on those RPGs is huge, the head. And it burns a small hole on the outside, and as it's burning through all that hot steel, hit me and my legs, literally taking my legs out from under me, and I had to suspend myself with my arms until I could get out of the tank. In immense pain, I yelled to our driver to stop as Steve Turner, my loader on the ground, who was also wounded, said Sarge has been hit badly. Not wanting to be a sitting target, I luckily pulled myself up and out, landing 12 feet on the ground, hard. I tell Steve to keep moving forward and stay engaged, firing all our guns, because a tank is a big target if you're sitting still. And those RPGs, they lose their effectiveness at a further range because the propellant burns out. But when they're close and they're popping out of spider holes and propping these things up and firing, it's like boom. Well, on the ground, losing blood and fading in and out of consciousness, I thought this would be the day that I died. Feeling hopeless and in excruciating pain, I see glimpses of my family. And I remember what Sister Rose said to me in the 8th grade when I asked her the question about praying and going to Mass. I would lay there bleeding out, putting tourniquets on both legs, applying morphine, antropets, they're pressure packed, and you hit them against, and it shoots that needle with the morphine into your legs. So it's not like administering a syringe. These are pressure packed for combat situations. I remember what Sister Rose said to me in the 8th grade when I asked the question about praying and going to Mass on first Fridays of the month. Alone and 10,000 miles and halfway around the world from home, I yelled out with what I think was my last breath, Lord, Sister Rose promised me I would not die without a priest around. Well, there were no priests and there were no chaplains where we were at that day. All of a sudden, two members of our infantry unit grabbed me. They said, Sarge, hang in there. And they started pulling me back. And one of the soldiers had watched Sarge's legs falling off. My right leg was literally, the only thing holding it was the tibia. It was just shattered. I thought for certain I would lose that leg. They pulled me back out of fire and explosions and started administering aid until our platoon medic, we called him Doc, grabbed me and said, hang in there, Sarge. Seconds and minutes seemed like hours before a Huey medevac dust-off would come in with fighting still raging and extract me and 2 other wounded and 1 KIA killed in action. As the dust-off lifts off the ground, I am in immense pain as enemy rounds are hitting the bottom of the ship, and there's lots of commotion. As again, the crew chief medic says, hang in there, Sarge, and gives me something really hard to bite. He tends to one of our guys with a huge chest wound and was near death. I'm praying frantically, Jesus help me, over and over. When the medic finally gets to me, he has one hand on my pulse and is starting to open up another morphine antropet package that are pressure packed sealed. And says, Sarge, how many of these have you had? And I said 2. He says, sorry, Sarge, I can't give you the 3rd one, as it would surely kill you. He could not find a pulse. The morphine had taken my heart rate down so low. I remember landing on that helicopter at the field hospital in Tainan province, and the one GI that was badly wounded, they took him off first, then they took me off. We're laying on the ground, and the doctors and the nurses are in blood-soaked, garments. And I'm laying there, and I vividly, to this day, remember laying there and watching personnel on the ground with 5-gallon cans of disinfectant, pouring it on the floor of that Huey dust-off medevac chopper. And it looked like Niagara Falls, all the blood coming off the side of that ship. Well, the doctor finally gets to me. He's got a mask on, hat, he's bloodied, and I've got a tag on my chest, and they're standing right over me. He says, prep the right leg, we're gonna remove it below the knee. And I don't know where the strength came from. I said, Jesus, help me. And I get up on my elbow, and I said, Doc, our medic, my guys have helped me stay alive for over 2 hours. Surely you're better than us, and you can save my leg. Well, by then, they're ripping off jungle fatigues and putting IVs in me and getting me ready for surgery. And I come out of surgery, and I see the prettiest sight, 2 feet right in front of me. Careful. Do I have my gun? Anyway, I'm not in combat right now. Anyway, I see 2 feet, the most beautiful sight, and I have those feet today. Thank you, Lord. After 22 surgeries in Okinawa at the Okinawa Med Center and a near amputation because of an infection, and not walking for over a year and 26 days, lots of rosaries and prayers and giving thanks, I would learn to walk again. The war was over for me. God is great all the time. Any day above ground is a good day. Before you complain about anything, be thankful for your life and the things that are still going well. I would go back home to Nebraska and eventually marry an old girlfriend. And my father had left Kiewit by that time and started a concrete construction business that he wanted me to be a part of. Well, it was certain I could not put up with the cold winters in Nebraska. And I told my mom and dad that I would be moving to Denver, to go to the University of Denver. And I never once thought about staying in that cold winter environment with my legs as bad as they were. I probably couldn't walk to this day. But I would end up getting married, make a long story short, the mulligan, and have 2 little girls. This was in 1972. And I'll never forget, it was the rockiest marriage from day one. Now, this day and age, they say a lot of servicemen have PTSD and are dealing with mental illness. Back then, they didn't have a description or definition for PTSD. They just thought we were crazy. And I was battling demons. There's no doubt I was battling some major spiritual warfare back then. And I think Norma married me because I pressured. Hey, marry me, I want to get married. I felt I needed to be loved. I felt so alone in the world, no family close by, and reluctant, I think she said yes to get me off her back. We got married, 2 little girls, and it was a troubling marriage from day one. It was not long after I was traveling on business after I got out of school at DU, working for a company called Investors Diversified Services, a leasing company, and then Seattle First National Bank, and went to work for them. I was home, happy, thinking, what a great life. 2 little girls, a wife that I thought loved me, and I loved her. And next day, she was managing 4 dry cleaners at the time in Denver, Silver State Dry Cleaning. And she said, can we go to lunch tomorrow? And I said, sure. So we fell asleep. I met her for lunch at this Village and Pancake House not too far from where her cleaners was. And she said to the hostess, I want that table right in the middle. And I always thought that was strange, why she asked for that table. And they sat us there. We no sooner got our menus, and they took our order, and she said, the reason I brought you here and the reason we're sitting right here is I'm telling you, I'm filing for divorce. She knew that if I was in the middle of a public place that I wouldn't cause a disturbance. Well, I almost did, but I didn't. I said, Norma, please don't. I said, is there another man? She said, no. She said, you're just mentally, you're dealing with so much and so much anger and hate that I can't put up with it anymore. I had no words or response at that time. We left, and I prayed again, and I would get home and I'd think, okay, I'll ask Norma if I move out. We had a duplex, a rental unit, and one of the two units was empty. I said, look, I'll move out just to give you some time to think about this. She said, okay, that's fair. So I moved out. Back then, again, no cell phones. I would wait for the phone to ring. I would call her, she wouldn't answer. And finally, a day or two, a week later, she'd call and say, okay, come on home, let's try it. I'd go back home. Well, she didn't want to try it and fix it and make things better. My little girls were missing their dad. I was like a yo-yo for almost 7 months, back and forth, praying, constantly praying. I'd go into a church. I don't care if it was a Presbyterian church, a Lutheran church, what have you. I would go into those churches and I would pray, begging that my wife would take me back. Well, the divorce finally became final. And again, I looked up and I thought that my God had literally avoided and not heard my prayers. And thus, I went dark. I lost my faith. I would not pray. I started hitting the 5 o'clock happy hours in southeast Denver, and hoping eventually that maybe she would call, but she never did. I'd enjoy my daughters on the weekends, and Nicole finally told me, she said, Dad, Mom has a friend. And I said, good. I said, it's not wise to be alone. And she said, he's a good friend. And I said, okay. I worked so hard to suppress those tears, and I dropped the girls back off at home. I remember taking them home early one Sunday afternoon, and I stuck my key in the door, and the key wouldn't work. And Nicole says to me, Nicole was the oldest, she said, Dad, Mom changed the locks on the keys because there could be burglars. I said, oh, your mom is so smart. Again, dying inside of me. I thought, how can she do this? Well, she would pull up, I'd give the girls a hug, and I'd be on my way. I lost faith so bad, friends would say, Manny, meet us, we're doing happy hour at the London House, or my office was on Cherry Street, not far from all the night spots in southeast Denver, Glendale. And I was like that. I lived a very, very sinful life, drinking, partying. And I'll never forget, my mom would even call me, and I wouldn't take my mom's call because I knew she was going to lecture me. And one night I was dancing, and this lady says to me, she said, do you have a business card? And I said, sure. I said, but I'm divorced. And she said, well, I'm divorced too. And I gave her my business card, not thinking anything of it. Well, a couple days later, I call from my my house to Doreen, our secretary at Seattle First National, and I said, Doreen, I should be in about 9:30. She said, oh, Manny, by the way, this guy has called 3 times, but he won't leave his name or a number. And I said, okay, I didn't think anything of it. I got into the office, probably about 8:30, 8:45. I grabbed my coffee in the Wall Street Journal, and my office was overlooking Cherry Street. If anyone knows Denver and Southeast Denver, Cherry Street, there's a Cherry Creek Sporting House on the corner. It's an office building. The Colorado Mine Company's across the street. And I no sooner sit down, open the journal, and Doreen, Manny. I said, yes, Doreen. My door was not closed, but she knocked. She knew I was reading the paper. She said, it's that guy. I said, which line? And she says, duh, it's the one blinking. So you remember phones had blinking lights. I hit that number and I said, this is Manny, can I help you? And the guy says, I hope so. I said, well, I'm here in my office. What can I do for you? He says, well, I want to get together. I said, well, give me an idea of what you want to get together about. He said, it is so personal. And I said, hey, friend, Mike, I said, what's the problem? What do you want to talk about? He said, well, there's no easy way to say this, but you're seeing my wife. I get this big lump in my throat. I said, I'm not seeing anyone's wife. In fact, I'm not dating. I'm divorced. And I said, I can, on your family's graves, I'm telling you, I am not dating anyone, let alone your wife. And I said, by the way, how'd you get my number? He said, I found your business card in my wife's purse. I said, whoa, who was your, and I said, look, she told me she was divorced. I just danced with her, but I said, I'm not dating anyone. He said, I'm trying to save my marriage. And all I could think of was myself. Well, that was that morning. Little did I know, we talked a little longer, and I said, look, believe me, I'm not dating. I don't even know your wife, other than meeting her on the dance floor at the London House. And he said, okay. I said, do you still want to get together? Dumb me. I said, do you still want to get together? He said, no, I believe you. He was weeding out the guys and finding out who was seeing his wife on a more regular basis, because that day at almost 2:30 in the afternoon, he walked into a guy's office point blank and shot him 9mm. When I was talking to him on the phone, I said, look, I'm here in my office. And he says, I know, I'm right below you on the payphone. Back in the 70s, early 80s, you may remember there were payphones on corners. And that afternoon, Doreen heard on the news, and the next morning I go in, Doreen says, Manny, did you see the news? That guy, that could have been the guy that called. And anyway, it hit me. I went down to Denver City Jail. I said, I want to see so-and-so. And he came to the window, grabbed the phone. I said, look, we never met, but I'm the person you called thinking I was seeing your wife regularly. And he was just silent, just emotionless. And I said, I'm so sorry what happened. I'll pray for you. And at that point, he said, thank you. I appreciate your prayers. And he hung up the phone, and I walked out. Again, I cheated death, thinking God had abandoned me. Now, I no sooner got out of that place, but I found my faith again, because, again, I stand on Psalm 118, verses 17 and 18. I shall not die, but live to declare the deeds of the Lord. The Lord chastised me harshly, but did not hand me over to death. That was strike two. Now, really quick, I'll close with this last example, how my faith in times of crisis has really supported me. I served on the board of directors of Children's Hospital Started at Chalk at Mission. A lot of people don't know, but at Mission Hospital, there's a hospital within a hospital. The entire 5th floor is all pediatric. That was Chalk at Mission. I was chairman of the board one year, in 2001, and Dr. Ron Adamany, I don't know if anyone here knows Ron Adamany, but he's a urologist, runs Mission Internal Medicine. He was on the board, but just a visiting board member. He didn't have any voting responsibility for Chalk. But he said, Manny, can I address the board? There were 13 board members that day. He said, can I have 5 minutes to address the board? And I said, Ron, what do you need? He says, well, we've got a new procedure called a virtual colonoscopy, and I need some guinea pigs. And I said, okay, I'll see. We've got a full agenda. So I let him speak, and he addressed the board, the men saying, we've got this new procedure. And we left the meeting that day. He said, Manny, you're a man of faith. He's Jewish, because we would shalom each other as we finished the board meetings. And he said, you might want to pray about it. I think you should do it. I said, I'm not even old enough for a colonoscopy. Well, long story short, I ended up having that virtual colonoscopy. It's a scan that goes up your midsection, and it scans your midsection. And I remember laying there with the monitor and Dr. Anthony Stauffer, Mission Internal Medicine, saying, Manny, these are your kidneys. Notice the left one? There's nothing on it. But see the right one, that little spot? It's probably a cyst, but he said, and most cysts are nothing, but you should go see your urologist. I said, I don't even have one. Can you refer me to one? I said, he's got to be Catholic. So he referred me to Dr. James Maglia. And I'll never forget, it was a cold December. Walked into his office with a big envelope full of film. We exchanged pleasantries. Manny, Jim, call me Manny. And the smiles all of a sudden turned to a quiet room. He reached in, grabbed the film, he threw it up, and he turned around and his face was this long. He said, Mr. Montanez. I said, oh, that's first bad mistake. A minute ago I was Manny. He said, Mr. Montanez, that is not a cyst, it's a tumor, and 99.9% are cancerous. My whole world flipped. I said, Doc, I need to bring my wife in. I'm hearing every other word. I took Lynn in, we talked, and I said, how about a biopsy? He said, I don't like to do biopsies. I said, everything I wanted, he didn't want. I said, would you be offended if I got a second opinion? He said, of course not. I've got a list of names. But he said, he was Dr. Maglia, he's a parishioner at St. Edward's, said, Manny, just go home and pray about it. I did. Lynn and I prayed, and I said, I feel good about Dr. Maglia. I'm going to stay with him. We went back, scheduled another appointment, went back and said, okay, Doc, I'm going to stick with you. I appreciate it. How soon can we do this? Can we do this next week? Thinking it's outpatient. He says, Manny, this is major surgery. It's your right kidney where most of your intestines are. I've got a scar this long. Now they do it, arthroscopy now, but I ended up having that procedure and determined there was a tumor not quite the size of a golf ball. It was fully encapsulated in my right kidney. So had he done the biopsy in that 2.5, 3 weeks before surgery, it could have started metastasizing. And by the grace of God, here I am today sharing this with you. So thank you very much. God bless you.